What doesn't make sense to me, though, as someone who had never read Oliver Twist, which is great, by the way, which is the best way to come into this, is to immediately say, by the way, I've never read the book that this is based on. Shit. I've already put myself 2 rungs beneath everybody else. But thankfully, I did spend most of the last week paging through it and listening to it on Audible, maybe not paying attention the entire time, but I did reacquaint myself with the story of Oliver Twist, which was not something I really had ever read before this. Like, genuinely, I don't know how I missed it in high school. I feel like this was one of the things that a lot of people read in high school. No?
Not me.
Not you? Did you? Professor Dodson, what did you read in high school? I mean, because we all read something Charles Dickens, right? Like, we all had to have read something Dickens. And no, really?
Oh, we didn't. They didn't assign any Dickens when I was in high school or college. I'll go ahead and say, I'll tell you right now, I'll start this interview with an admission. I've never read a word of Charles Dickens.
Ever?
I mean, I know that Tale of Two Cities line.
I mean, we all know like something from some of their, like, that's the thing. Like, the only thing I read in high school was Great Expectation. I read that. Oh. And that was, I mean, it was a lot of fun. I mean, and by that, I mean, not at all. I don't know, like it didn't, wrong. I don't know. Like, it's one of those things where I read Great Gatsby in high school too, and I didn't enjoy it. And then I reread it in 2022 and I enjoyed it immensely. So it's like, maybe this wasn't the best thing to get this person of this age to read to appreciate it. Maybe you missed the mark. So I kind of feel the same way with Dickens. Like, when I was parsing over Oliver Twist's story, I was like, this is fine. It's not for me. I understand it's one of those things where I think we understand the importance of what it is, and I don't necessarily need to go and involve myself intimately with the source material to appreciate what its effect has been on so many things, clearly, including the fact that on this episode of the Culture Cast, I'm still your host, Chris Dashew, and I'm joined by Professor of Film and Media Studies, as well as a co-founder of Someone's Favorite Productions, and most recently wrote a book totally about Oliver Twist. No, his most recent book is American Twilight, The Cinema of Tobe Hooper. I bet there's a chapter in there about Poltergeist. I bet there is. There's just gotta be, right? And maybe it has an asterisk in it. I don't know. That's always a fun conversation to have, but we're not having that conversation on this episode. We're talking about Oliver, and I'm joined by Professor Will Dodson.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for not only picking this movie, but making sure that we did it.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll get into my personal history with the movie in a bit, but I want to address something you brought up with the high school curriculum. High school really should be about learning how to read, and The Great Gatsby is not for kids. It's you really need to read that when you're in your early 20s and you're starting to realize that you're a dumbass,
You realize the American dream that you've been sold is a fucking lie.
Right. And that you don't deserve it anyway,
Right. I mean, exactly. And that was what happened when I read Great Gatsby. I was like, oh, right. Like, this book is really like it honestly is somewhat ironic that they make you read it in high school. 'Cause it's like, if you actually understood it, you'd probably want to smash your fucking head against a concrete wall really hard until you had nothing left. Like, it's not a happy book. It's not even like a book that teenagers don't get it. And frankly, it's kind of strange that it would be like, we're reading this book right before you go off and try to have a life. So, yeah.
And so to the point of Dickens, I've got like I've somehow picked up over the years a like complete set, like a nicely bound with really pretty dust jackets, like the complete works of Charles Dickens. And I keep telling myself, I'm going to start plowing
these days.
Bad boys, and they're all like 1,000 pages long. Because for most of his life, he was writing serialized fiction for newspapers and getting paid by the word. So that's why the stories are so damn long, because he's got an incentive to be wordy. But yeah. Nothing like that was ever assigned. And I think a lot of people probably know Dickens best through Mickey Mouse and the Muppets doing their respective versions of A Christmas Carol, or the various movie versions of Oliver, with or without anti-Semitic stereotypes.
Without? Is it really an Oliver adaptation?
Well, thankfully, this one is blessedly free.
Yeah, boy, isn't it?
It's got other stuff, but yeah. So again, Dickens is somebody that I'll read at some point. But the fact that you've started thumbing through Oliver Twist puts you ahead of me, so I'll rely on you for the literary.
So yeah, like Will just mentioned, on this episode of the Culture Cast, we're still doing musicals this month, and this one was on the schedule. It was not changed in media res like some of the episodes this month were. We diverted away from the things that we were going to talk about, like Les Mis, and decided to talk about Cats 2019 because we fucking hate ourselves here at the Culture Cast. And by we, I mean I. But no, on this episode, we're going to be talking about the 1968 musical drama adaptation of the stage name of the same name, based on a book by Charles Dickens, more or less the same name, missing the twist part. Talking about Oliver.
Please, sir, I want some more.
More? The word for Oliver is more. It's much, much more than a musical. Oliver, the internationally famed stage triumph, now acclaimed by the international press as a monumental screen experience.
I'm reviewing the situation. Can a fella be a villain all his life?
Ron Moody as Fagin, Oliver Reed as Bill Sykes, Harry Seacombe as Mr. Bumble, Shady Wallace as Nancy, Mark Lester as Oliver, Jack Wilde as the Artful Dodger.
He's gonna be a right little Bill Sykes.
You'll hear 14 marvelous numbers, including As Long as He Needs Me, and...
Yes, I do. Anything for you. It's a fine life. It's a fine life.
Remember our old tune, be back soon.
So the film is directed by Carol Reed, screenplay by Vernon Harris, based off of the musical of the same name by Lionel Bart, which, like I mentioned, is based on the 1837 novel by Charles Dickens. And this version stars Ron Moody as the titular Oliver, a boy who just wanted some more. And shit, when you just want some more, bad things start to happen to you in life, don't they? And hey, this movie's also got one of my favorite actors and one of the few men who would tell people he had a tattoo on the end of his penis, Oliver Reed, along with Mark Lester, Harry Seacombe, a whole bunch of people, Jack Wilde as well, Ron Moody. There's a lot of great performances and there's a lot of songs. I had never seen this movie before, but Will, I'm going to kick it to you first. What is your experience with Oliver, and when did you first see it, and what do you think now rewatching it for the Culture Cast?
Yeah, so when I saw that this was an option, I jumped on it because I saw this movie many, many times as a child. It broadcast on, I don't know, ABC or something like that. And it would, we didn't have cable television growing up, but we managed to have a couple of the broadcast networks. And so I would see Oliver maybe once a year. I want to say that. I need to talk to my mother and ask her how I saw Oliver so many times. But I committed many of the songs to heart. Thankfully, I've forgotten most of them at this point, so I won't sing on the Culture Cast. And I remember just being fascinated by that world and not relating to Oliver because I wasn't like born into crushing poverty. But
you weren't a street urchin as a child.
But we did grow up in a you know, we weren't super well off or anything like that. We were in the lower class in terms of our lifestyle and what we had access to in some ways, and in other ways we were doing great. So I don't want to sound like some kind of pauper or whatever, but I related to it and was attracted to it. And the Artful Dodger was to me just the coolest kid that had ever lived, and I wanted to be more like the Artful Dodger. Somehow wanted to learn how to pickpocket and just kind of melt into the alleyways. I remember being scared to death of Oliver Reed The way he just kind of turned on the menace as the movie went on. So this was the first time I'd watched it as an adult, just a few days ago. Now let's see, probably the last time I saw it before now I was 11 or 12. So we're talking about 30 years ago.
That's wild.
I was struck by the style of the film, which seemed to me like some of the sequences had to be the inspiration for Monty Python's production of Every Sperm is Sacred. Like
Oh my God, right? Holy shit.
The look is just spot on. Like I had the damn song playing in my head while I was watching the Who Will Buy this Wonderful Morning sequence, which is a great sequence, by the way. I was also struck, as a kid, I don't know who Carol Reed is, but now, of course, we know who Carol Reed is, the director of so many of the great films noir, The Third Man being the most important of those. And I was struck by the expressionistic style, the noirish lighting, and just the look of the alleyways and the buildings that really captured the expressionistic influence on so much of the noir style, which you don't see that much in lavish musicals. And so I just found it a feast for the eyes. and yeah, Artful Dodger was still cool as hell. The actor who played him, I found, had a pretty tragic life, died young of alcoholism induced cancer, which is sad, but his performance as Artful Dodger, and this was like his second or third movie, he was 16 years old and looked younger. Just amazing. And I never realized until I started looking around for trivia, Oliver Reed is Carol Reed's nephew. Although the casting was a coincidence, it turns out. The people who cast Oliver Reed he had mostly been doing Hammer movies at that point, and a couple of Michael Winner films. He was in Joseph Losey's The Damned. So he was just starting to become like a bankable star on his own. And I think he's great. We'll talk more about Oliver Reed later, I'm sure. All right, that's what I'm going to start with. The noir, the kids' performances, Artful Dodger, Oliver Reed. Holy cow.
So I had never seen this, and for no particular reason. I mean, for me, because musicals are not something I shy away from. I enjoy musicals. I would ask you, are you a musical fan? Are you a fan of the stage musicals? Are you a fan of film adaptations? Probably another question needs answering before we go any further.
You reminded me of that great line from Dr. Strangelove. I do not shy away from musicals, Mandrake, but I do deny them by essence. I actually teach a course called Hollywood Musicals and the American Dream, and it's kind of like it's a deep dive into Hollywood. So Oliver's not part of the curriculum. No British or European musicals in this one because it's very focused on what we started with, the economic myth of the American dream.
Right.
So I start with like Gold Diggers of 1933, and I go up to about Little Shop of Horrors or however far we get. I showed Team America World Police at the end of it one time just to horrify. But that's my like pat on the back way of saying yes, I like musicals. It's weird though. I don't really like stage play musicals, and the only reason I can tell you is that I prefer the choreography of the camera and the editing. I'm really more attracted to that than I am to the songs of most musicals.
It's fair.
And I don't know, there's something about being in a theater with live actors that just irritates me.
I mean, hey, that's totally fair. I mean, and completely valid as well. I was going to ask you, have you ever used American Pop in your class? The Bakshi film.
Yeah, no, I haven't, but I could. That's a good idea. I actually don't have any animated films in there, and that's my bad. There aren't a whole
lot that I would say are like adult and focus on exactly what you're talking about, which is like the American dream. And that one's through kind of the lens of immigrants, which I think is equally as fun and interesting. But I also am a fan of musicals. I mean, I'm a fan of musicals, movies, stage musicals. I don't have any problem with, but I understand the sentiment. I had never seen this before because this is, for me, I'm just going to be honest. This is not the kind of musical that makes me excited.
Sure.
And what's funny is because, we were talking before the show and, we were talking about, ourselves and stuff. And like you mentioned, like, they're you have a family and stuff like that. Like what's weird to me is like for someone who had seen this a lot, it never came back at your life at any point. Like, and like, it's weird to me because like this movie feels for me like the kind of movie that I would have seen as a kid and the same thing would have happened. Like it doesn't feel like I would have enjoyed it at that age, but then it feels like something at some point I would have been like, okay, like, I don't know if this is going to continue to have any staying power for me. Cause I'm sure you've shown people in your life things that were important to you that you did enjoy, but like something like this, which like theoretically could and should have made an impact, didn't. And I think for me sitting and watching it, it's a fun, quaint little story, but for me, it kind of, in a way, like it's a nice movie for when it was made. But that in and of itself, it's not a negative. It's a very, like you've mentioned with like the way it looks and the stage, like the production design and everything, like these are things that are really important and well thought out. But I mean, for the most part, the story is just not uninteresting, but it feels so beyond rote. And so just kind of not by the book, but by the numbers. But again, like I think at this point, like even if you don't know Oliver Twist, the story, like you can kind of see where this is going from like a million miles away, which again, for me, not that I need a twist or something in my musicals, but I need something more than a very boilerplate plot. And then for me, the music is okay. I don't know, like I wasn't like there was maybe 2 songs that really took me in and I was kind of transported into this world. And I watch a lot of Indian cinema. So for me, like musical numbers have, sometimes it's the interior of the character's mind and that's kind of their external expression of what's going on. Sometimes it is diegetic. In this, like, I just, all these musical numbers felt just like, this is going to sound really terrible, but a lot of these musical numbers felt just like a really middle of the road version of that song that Charlie's mom sings in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory that everybody skips through, but like better versions of that song where it's like a very sentimental song with someone in like in an old English setting staring off into the distance and singing, sadly about their life and where they are. And it's like that for me just doesn't move the needle for me, even though I can 100% concede this is a well-made, well-acted, well thought out, well choreographed movie.
Yeah. All right. There's a lot in there. So
right. So
let me say, I watching it again after almost 30 years, which I don't want to say that again because it makes me feel bad. Like, holy shit, it's been 30 years.
I mean, again, like I'm not saying it's not deservedly like slept on, like, know.
When it came out, some Blu-ray of it was released some time ago and I immediately picked it up. I've had it in my collection for years and years. I just never opened it up and then watched it for the first time in 30 years. The nerd in me was struck by, I immediately was like, somebody needs to 4K this.
Right. It's nice looking. Like that's,
amazing. I think visually it would really benefit for some high grade restoration. But to your point about the songs, I was underwhelmed by the opening song, Food, Glorious Food, which I didn't even remember from my childhood. I felt like this is a real sophisticated criticism of the song. There were too many syllables. Like at times the rhythm got messed up for me. Like I was following along with the song and then a line would have just too many words in it. And I would say, whoa, what's happening here? But then once we got into who will buy this glorious morning or this wonderful morning, gotta pick a pocket or two. Those songs, which I remembered very well, picked me up. And I started noticing that every single song is transactional in nature. It's either about buying something or consuming something. There's the song in the middle of which I refer to in a kind of horrified way as the domestic abuse song.
As long as he needs me, you mean?
As long as he needs me, which is also transactional, right? Like I'm going to stay as long as he needs me. And no matter what he does to me, I know he needs me, right? Like that's that classic
right
trap that one falls into in an abusive relationship, where you think you deserve it, but you also think that you're doing some good. And, she thinks the whole time that she's going to be able to change him or tame him or channel him in some way.
I can change him, Will. I can change him.
Right.
I mean, that is what that song should have been called. Like, it's, you mentioned the anti-Semitism optics of the some of the versions. Like, it's hard to get around that song as being like anything other than just like, again, like where the story ultimately ends up too. Like, yeah, again, it's a musical, and there's the faded love, and there's the the maudlin nature of what this story ends up being. But that song is a hard listen any way you cut it. Like, it's just like, as if you've seen this before, you know where it's going, and it's like, oh God.
Yeah, and it's dark. And I should say, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, I'm definitely going to say some stuff. Dark stuff in this movie. And okay, so going back to the transactional nature of the songs, I'm not familiar with the stage musical, so I'm assuming all these songs are and most of the dialogue kind of come from that vision.
Only one song missing from the movie that's in the musical, and it's the song that Oliver Reed's character would have performed but didn't.
Oliver, I don't think Oliver can he sing?
Can Paul Sorvino sing in Repo, the Genetic Opera? Can Pierce Brosnan sing in Mamma Mia?
Can Russell Crowe sing in Les Mis?
No, that I will answer that one with a fucking no.
Well, and when you think about the Bill Sikes character, I think if he had sung something, it would have made him less frightening.
Oh, totally. 100%.
And I really want to get into the Bill Sikes character in depth momentarily, but just to linger a little bit longer on the transactional nature of the songs, I as a grown up, I began to see the movie, and to reiterate, this movie was the first version of the Oliver story that I ever encountered. So my vision of Oliver Twist is this.
Right.
I subsequently have seen the David Lean version and the Roman Polanski version, all of that, but I plan to read it as soon as I can. But anyways, so I began thinking about a whole new reading of the Oliver character, because he's this kid, and the first thing he does is he asks for more.
Right.
And then through the course of the movie, he just gets more until finally he's a freaking rich kid, and talk about the dream, the rags to riches dream. That kind of Americanized version of it. He, through virtue of what? He's cute and he looks sad.
Literally, that's literally it.
I gotta say though, that kid is cute.
That's why they cast him.
He really is a cute kid. And ironically, as an adult, he was friends with Michael Jackson. Mark Lester apparently became one of Michael Jackson's best friends as an adult.
That's right.
But anyway, and I kept kind of watching the Oliver character and trying to get into his interiority, not expecting some kind of subtle and nuanced performance or anything for a young, very young and relatively inexperienced actor. He pulled off the innocent look, the vulnerable look very well. But he just kind of gets pushed, from place to place by these various people until finally he is where he wants to be. And what right? Like, it turns out that he's got this long lost relative, that his mother was a woman of ill repute.
That's why she left.
Right. There's all kinds of crazy stuff in there that I just didn't notice when I was a kid that made me really get into some of the class-based themes and economic themes, kind of geeking out on those. Yeah.
I will say he's a cute kid, but he makes a less cute painting with female hair on it. I'll say that much.
That was kind of a horrifying painting.
He does look like her. You're right, he does. What a horrifying image this is. Yeah, it's weird because I did not expect, because I watched the movie first and then I started, reading through the source material, and then I watched the movie again. I did not expect Oliver to have so little agency of his own in the musical.
Yeah.
It's surprising because, again, the idea of he asks for more at the beginning and that's all he ever gets. I mean, the character's never really punished in any substantial way. Everyone within the musical's compound of people that he interacts with, other than one person, go to bat for him. Not only do they go to bat for him, that they end up adopting him after this misunderstanding in the street. A character dies for him to get him to get away to this, like you mentioned, rich uncle. And Oliver as a character is a cipher, 100%. Like, all he does is he sings the one song, where he's looking up through the grate, so sad. And I mean, it is sad. Like, and obviously, he's there in the other songs, but like, I'll Do Anything is such, well, I'll Do Anything and Where Is Love? I guess it's Where Is Love is the big like solo performance. And it's just like, it's so sad, but like, that's it. Like, there's nothing else to it. It's just him asking where his family is. And it's like, Jesus, dude, you're going to get it. Like, it's coming. Like, no. And that's the thing. Nobody else in this movie has a positive story for the most part, other than Oliver and Fagin, and I guess the Artful Dodger. But by the end of the movie, all those kids that were pickpockets have been scattered to the wind, clearly. Right. Bill Sikes is dead. Nancy is dead. And Oliver gets to go live and be I mean, again, what would be considered now like a rich kid, like a literal, like a child of privilege. And it is kind of a weird moral quandary that the musical is in, because it doesn't, not that it should say that this is a problem, but it kind of just doesn't understand that it's kind of just a weird thing to show us very little of the character ever taking his lumps. He just kind of always gets what he wants for nothing.
Yeah. And again, going back to that transaction theme, right? The I Do Anything song is basically like offering yourself to someone, right? And not in service, but just to say, I'll do anything you tell me to do, right? And
literally.
Right. And then, the Where Is the Love song is kind of like looking for that avenue, right, to lock into, to feel safe and to be moved along on the path. And you contrast the story of Oliver, right, with the story of Dodger, right, this streetwise kid, the prince of the pickpockets, the one who's going to show him the ropes. And the thing that I didn't notice as a kid that now becomes my obsession with the movie is the parallel of Bill Sikes and the Artful Dodger. Because who's Bill Sikes? Holy shit, he's Dodger grown up.
Right.
And I never realized that. And it's probably part of the damn novel that I don't know, even though I managed to become a professor in higher education. But I read this version of Sikes as having been Dodger for Fagin, which kind of explains the tension in their relationship. Fagin's always kind of telling him what to do, and Sikes is getting angrier and angrier, but keeps kind of backing down, kind of goes along with him. And you see, well, this is Dodger's future, right? And so the scene where Fagin and Dodger leave town, reunited, to me is the most chilling scene of the movie now. Because I'm like, Dodger's doomed, man.
They're so happy to be thieves, though. I mean, there's nothing that could go wrong. I promise. Yeah. Nothing bad could come of this. No, it's interesting. I mean, it is interesting because, again, I don't think that the movie plays it up enough. And I think that, again, I mean, if you focus on that too long, it becomes painfully apparent how horrifying this is going to be. Because, yeah, I mean, it is subtext of, and at least, again, the way I interpret it, like you said, with Bill Sikes, that character, when he becomes fully unhinged, which he does, I mean, there's no stopping someone like him. And you can see where this, the character of the Dodger could be going down that exact same road. Because, again, like you mentioned, by the end of the movie, he has accepted that there is nothing else. And Bill Sikes has that. You get that same feeling from Bill Sikes throughout the movie that, like, this is the thing that he's good at and nothing else. And he's willing to do literally whatever it takes to protect that, including, I mean, he murders Nancy, just kills her in cold blood, which is like for a musical for children. Jesus Christ. It's, and I mean, the scene itself is awful because, again, like, I mean, Oliver Reed plays it immaculately, But I mean, then we see her like legs shaking afterwards. It's like, oh Lord, like this is, I mean, 1968's different time, obviously, in cinema than now. But man, like I can see watching this movie as a kid and being mortified by Oliver Reed, like genuinely terrified by the visage of Oliver Reed.
Well, 68's what, Rosemary's Baby?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we're getting there. But yeah, I see it now as being part and parcel of a Carol Reed thriller. I think of Fallen Angel and Third Man and Night Train to Munich and all these movies, and see the violence that kind of erupts out of nowhere as being both frightening and also part of that place. And then again, I look at Dodger's outfit, his hat, his suit. Now I look at Sykes' hat and suit, and I think again, this is what's going to happen to Dodger. This is what happened to Sykes. This is what's going to happen to Dodger. But we're here to cheer on Oliver,
the less interesting character in all of this. Like,
and the hell with all these other kids.
Wow. I mean, again, like there's this weird morality of the movie that like at the end where all these kids are just scattered to the wind and it's okay, like fine, sure, why not? I mean, again, it's weird because Oliver, and even, I mean, the musical, obviously, like you mentioned, like there's violence in this time and place. The musical, obviously, and the book not so much, but definitely the musical, it really sanitizes this story too. And makes it a lot more palatable. And again, like it makes being hungry fun. I mean, like, you know what I mean? Like that, the beginning, like you mentioned with that opening song, like the opening song is literally, we get fed nothing all day, but we get to see that they're eating in there. And that's enough. And it's like, Jesus Christ, what the fuck is this movie? Like in a lot of ways, and I don't know if you've seen the recent film adaptation of the musical Matilda. In a lot of ways, like Oliver Twist is what Matilda cribs so much from Oliver Twist and actually tells the story where you're more engaged with that character. That is the one who is put upon, but that character has so much more autonomy in the story that you are immediately more engaged because she is the one doing the things that are being perceived as pushing back on, the authority or society or the rules. She's doing that. Oliver never does anything. He just floats through the musical.
Yeah. And going back to the themes, now I'm realizing, okay, so I thought of the Every Sperm is Sacred number from Monty Python's Meaning of Life as got to be influenced by Oliver. And now I'm also thinking, of that opening sequence of Food, Glorious Food. I'm thinking of The Wall, right? Pink Floyd's The Wall, 1982. And what do all three of those things have in common? They're talking about institutions, right? The institutions of control, of conditioning, whether it's the workhouse for orphans or the Catholic Church or the educational industrial complex, right?
Right.
All of it's designed to not just fashion us into good citizens, but to keep us where we are.
Right.
And if we do, manage to slip through the cracks and rise above our station, we pull the ladder up behind us, as Oliver is about to do, right?
Well, that's the thing, right? Like that's the weird morality of the story is that, like, I have to assume that if you were adapting this now, you wouldn't make the character of Oliver so palatable. Like, why would you? Like, and look, I mean, it's, he's a blonde-haired little kid in this movie. Like, it's so on the nose, it hurts. Like, in a lot of ways, like, and I hate to say this, but this is a term that I feel like is more contemporary than this movie would have ever been able to be labeled at the time. But in a lot of ways, this movie feels like Oscar bait.
Well,
like,
worked.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, it worked and created so many other things like this that end up doing this same thing. But I mean, yeah, it got 11 nominations, won 6 of them, including Best Picture and Best Director. So you got the 2 that really matter. I mean, Oliver Reed got nominated, didn't win, which for me is like the biggest shock in all of this. But at the same time, if this movie had been about the Bill Sykes character, Oliver Reed wouldn't have even had any competition for the Academy Award because he would have won it outright. Because if the movie had focused on the interesting characters, the ones that are just at the periphery, it would have been a much more interesting movie. It would have been a much more interesting movie if Oliver wasn't the main character. If Oliver was like Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ Superstar.
Right. If this had been Bill Sykes' movie, it would have been like Taxi Driver as a musical.
I mean, really, like it would have actually been something where people would have said, okay, we can take this story and take it in a direction that more is suiting the time and the place. Because this is coming out in 1968. Like what I mean, in a lot of ways, like, doesn't this feel like the Academy making that really fun decision that they always do, which is giving the Academy Award to things that are really not pushing the envelope? I mean, in 1968, this is not something that's like, again, like people are going and seeing it, but in 1968, this is not cutting edge filmmaking. This is not moving the needle for a lot of the filmmakers. I mean, one of the directors that was nominated for Best Director this same year was Stanley Kubrick for 2001: A Space Odyssey. Right. I'm not saying that should have won, but like, again, like this movie wins. I mean, if you're basing it purely off of production design, sure, like fair. I guess yes, this is a well-made movie.
No, that's a good point. I didn't realize this was from 2000.
Like, it's kind of insane, frankly. Like, it's a well-directed movie, but I mean, ultimately, it's just a well-made musical that's adapted from a stage play. Like, give me the ball, let me drop it in the hoop. We scored, everybody. Team effort, great job. It's like, I'm not saying it's not well-made. It's just if 1968 is the time your movie comes out, you're not really moving the needle in cinema.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, this is like 20 years after The Third Man, right? Third Man was 1949. This is 1968. Carol Reed had kind of come off one of the biggest flops of his career with The Agony and the Ecstasy, which was kind of an epic about Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel with Charlton Heston as Michelangelo.
Boy, I'm itching to see that.
It's not bad. I mean, it is bad.
Like, it doesn't sound great.
I enjoy it. It really is a fever dream of a movie. Just Heston in full glistening bronze skin, you know, tortured artist.
I mean, that sounds fun. Like, that sounds fun in like a weird way.
It is. It's not a good movie, but it is an excellent movie to experience. All right, so I'm pulling up the 1968 Oscars. Holy cow. Lion and Winter, you had Battle of Algiers, Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet. Oh, man, I didn't realize. Yeah, well, so you say this, you felt like this movie was kind of Oscar bait, and maybe it was. Ron Moody as Fagin, I thought, was amazing, and so I don't dispute his nomination at all.
No, I mean, he's like other than some of the other people, like, he's given so much time that he's able to be a fully formed character, and he's so good in like every scene that he's in. He's as good as Oliver Reed, like 100%.
You know, and I'd misremembered him. As a kid, I think I thought that was Alec Guinness, who of course famously played the disgustingly anti-Semitic version in the David Lean adaptation. Guinness had a habit of doing those those kinds of things in Lean movies. But yeah, Moody's Fagin is a really interesting character because he is so. You see him with the kids, and he's this scamp, right? He's this rascal, and that's how he charms them. He's a Pied Piper,
literally.
But then when you look at his relationship with Sykes, and you think, you know, what happens when these kids grow up? You have to see Fagin as the villain. You know, not to use the parlance of our times, but talk about a groomer, right? Like
that's the thing. It's like I read it the same way, and it's such a strange, like, he is a king of the thieves, but he's an adult. Like, it's the weird power dynamic, the power disparity there is just so strange.
Utterly charming until you think about it.
Yeah. When he's singing songs, I mean, You can't help but love him. But then, yeah, it's like, oh, by the way, like this guy like in a modern day setting, you'd be like, this guy is grooming children to rob for him.
Yeah, at best.
Yeah.
You hope that's what it is.
Well, and that's the other thing. The character in the book is killed at the end. He's sentenced to be hung for Nancy's death.
Oh, I see.
So, yeah, like he's part of, I mean, he ends up being more part and parcel with what happens to Bill Sikes than the movie leads on, which I feel like it kind of robs the movie of some of what I would consider to be like an emotional core, which is he never changes, and the movie says that's okay. The movie has this like really weird, and again, I'm not saying a life of crime is a bad thing. It's not my opinion. The movie is saying a life of crime is okay, which is like it's a strange moral quandary, because it has like you mentioned, a child who ascends the ladder of privilege, pulls the ladder up behind him. That's your main character. And then your secondary main character is a king of the thieves who grooms children to rob for him. And he, though many times is tempted and and he literally knows that he could have a better life, could do better, have a wife, have a job, have a family, all the things that, again, like more sustainable than being a king of the pickpockets, and yet rejects it completely. But the movie doesn't play it in a way where that's a problem. It's like, that's the quandary, but fuck it, I'm a thief. And it's like, okay, fine, that's fair. But there's no nuance to the way it's presented, because the movie just goes, it's fine, he's a thief. Like all the nuance gets drained away in the last like couple minutes of the movie.
Right. Well, the system isn't changing, so why should they? Right. There's no moral judgment of Fagin's enterprise.
No.
Nancy is the emotional heart of the movie, but she's doomed from the start. We know that from the song.
Right.
Sikes is the tragic character, right? Who's also doomed because he's gone too far. His rage has built, right? His resentment has built up to the point that he's dangerous to everybody around him. So he's doomed. Dodger is fated maybe to something similar, maybe not, but he's still yoked to Fagin, right? Who, yeah, they're skipping to the next town. And you know, again, I gotta think. I have to think. This is Carol Reed. This is one of the greatest directors of dark movies that are heaped with irony. I have to think he knows what's going on here, right? The story is very slight and simple, and one character, we presume, Oliver, gets to live happily ever after, and maybe Fagin and Dodger make their way somehow, and everybody else is incidental, right? Like everybody else is dead or gone.
Right.
And if you told me that was the plot of a film noir, I would say that sounds pretty good. That's dark as hell.
Well, and that's the thing. It's like, it's so weird that this movie is the way that it is, and it has the things going on in it that it does, because to your point, it doesn't, like the musical nature of the movie feels incidental to me. Like it's a musical, but okay, like really it's a story. It's the Oliver Twist story. That's really what it is. And the music helps, but what the music ends up doing is it just kind of makes everything seem a lot more fun than it has any right to be, given when it's set, what's going on, the fate of pretty much all the characters. Because like you said, Oliver probably has a happy ending, but you know, what does that mean at the time and place that he's living in? Well, he's probably going to live 10 years longer than everybody else, but still, still die of something, again, relatively, curable now, but incurable at the time and place that the film is set. But again, to your point, in so many ways, the movie just doesn't really concern itself with anyone other than Fagin and Oliver. And even the Artful Dodger is kind of forgotten. Like, he's there, but he's not, in the way that the movie kind of compartmentalizes Bill Sikes away from everything. It kind of does the same with Artful Dodger. And I think there's a version of this story that should have just been focusing on everyone other than Oliver, and having Oliver kind of move through the story in like a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern type of way, where these characters are interacting with him, but following his story. Like, why would we follow his story at this point? Everybody knows it. Let's see what's going on in the periphery. And I mean, again, I understand It's an adaptation of a 1960 musical. And so the musical is dictating this story. And that musical is a musical adaptation of Oliver, a very, again, straightforward musical adaptation, but it pulls all the sad stuff out. Like, other than Nancy getting murdered, which in musicals is fine. Like, and in musicals, like, characters do die in musicals all the time. But again, like, for the most part, even musicals coming out at the time have a little bit more to them than just, hey, it's the Oliver Twist story with some music.
Right. Yeah, I hear what you're saying there. I don't know. It's interesting. When was The Sound of Music? Let me check and see when that year was. Sound of Music. Okay, that's 65. And so at this point, really, I mean, musicals as a dominant genre are fading pretty quickly. And the main ones that make the splash are these big productions, these roadshow productions like Sound of Music, like Oliver. But after this, there aren't that many big studio musicals for quite some time, right? This is kind of the end of the cycle.
Well, and that's the thing about this movie is, like you mentioned, in a lot of ways, this kind of thing is such a thing that really is, it's not now, I wouldn't say it's now a thing, but I think that there have been opportunities and attempts to recapture this kind of, like you mentioned, big, bombastic, we're making the sets and we're like Les Mis, right? Like the Tom Hooper version of Les Mis is, I mean, again, it's well made. It looks nice, but, outside of that, like, it's just Les Mis on the screen. Like, and if you weren't able to see it on the stage, you're seeing it on the screen. And in a lot of ways, this feels like that. It's not doing anything with the source material that the source material hasn't already done. It's just taking the source material and saying, all right, here it is on screen. And again, we're not going to have Oliver Reed sing. So that's the only difference. We're leaving one of the songs off, which, I mean, again, I went and listened to the song from the musical. Do I want a version of Oliver Reed singing it? Not necessarily. Would it have been interesting? Sure. But to your point, it takes all of the menace away. And I mean, there's a version of this where there's just no music and you have a great Oliver Reed performance being a menacing Bill Sikes. And in my mind, like, I feel like that would have been a much more interesting movie to have, because then we would have gotten more of everything else. And because it's a musical, we have these fun moments with Oliver and the kids. But again, by the end of it, we don't know any of the other kids, and nothing that feels like a moment where we're supposed to have this rousing moment with the characters. It all falls hollow because by the intermission, they're literally all forgotten about, even earlier than the ending. They're forgotten about at the intermission. The moment he goes to his uncle's house, it's like, well, it's now the Oliver, Sykes, and Fagin story.
Yeah.
It's so it's such a conventional movie, which again, like, it's not a bad thing. But in 2024, watching this movie with so many other, even just an adaptation of a musical, like the multiple stage versions of like a Jesus Christ Superstar, the way that it's been told, you could imagine someone coming into Oliver and taking it and doing something subversive with it. But again, like, does that really do the original story any justice? No, because the original story is about, like you mentioned, the rags to riches story. So you can't subvert that story, because the basic story is you have to have a kid who's a orphan, not an orphan anymore at the end. And he can't be the villain of the piece. He can't be the antagonist of the piece. He has to be the hero. And I just don't know who wants to see that story in the 21st century.
Is it really 2024?
Yeah.
Well, we are seeing that story in the 21st century, aren't we? Because, like, that's the thing about Oliver, right? Is that he's not really gutter track, right? He's actually upper class kid,
misplaced baby, essentially,
who's been misplaced. And so he's really just reclaiming his rightful place in the social and economic hierarchy. And you can't help but think of certain individuals who claim to have fulfilled the American dream through nothing but hard work and maybe a $4 million loan from their dad.
I mean, that's what I mean. Like, it's just it in this day and age, like, I'm so sick and tired of this fucking story, because it's been jammed down our throats about real people. But then you find out, just like in Oliver Twist, they weren't like you said, like, not to name people, but someone being born into a family that had a South African diamond mine. It's not impressive that you have a lot of money now. You had a lot of money when you were born. You just have more money, but you already had a lot of money. So for me, it's like, okay, like, I'm impressed, but it ends up being this story that, like you said, like, he's not even he's not Aladdin.
Right.
I mean, he's not like, and I mean, even Aladdin, the story of Aladdin, the way Disney tells it, they end up robbing it of its own message, 2 movies later, where it turns out he is actually and it's like, okay, so what's the point then? If you can't have a story about these kinds of characters without telling us that there's actually something else going on throughout the narrative, then that entire center core of your story will ring false ultimately, because at some point people aren't going to want to hear these stories anymore. And I think we're at that time in history right now, frankly. I don't think this would play very well outside of people finding the music charming. I just don't know if the story has like a lot of legs in the modern day. But that's the thing that now is more fun to embrace, which is the rich being bad is fun. Like Succession and all the pieces of media where it's like, look at the rich people being fucking pieces of shit, like we know for the most part they are, and reveling in it, and that being the entertainment. Like it's hard for me to be entertained by someone who's the upper crust now, when like, again, like the Oliver character just doesn't do anything to get it anyways. He just, oops, I didn't even attempt to pickpocket you, uncle, who apparently I didn't know I had. Like, right. Come on. Like, it's just, he didn't even do the thing that he got in trouble for, like, to further prove the point of a lack of autonomy in your own story.
And innocence. He's got to be innocent.
Completely innocent throughout.
Innocent except for one thing. The one thing that characterizes him as a member of the wealthy class. He's hungry and he wants more.
Always. And he will never take less than more. He's the only one willing to go up and ask for more. And in asking for more, he gets everything he wants.
To be fair, right? The reason he goes up to ask for more is because of the straw game, right? He drew the long straw, so he had to do it. But that just kind of makes it fate, right? There's some fate to the story,
right?
I don't know. Like I enjoyed the movie even more now that I've made it dark and twisted.
I just want it to I would want it to embrace the irony of the story and make it an ironic story. Like, don't just rest on the laurels of the original story and the original story's message, because the original story's message is just, again, like, it's fun and quaint, and yeah, it's great that this is an adaptation, and like I said, it's a good adaptation. But for me, subjectively, I have a hard time stomaching these kinds of stories anymore, given the world that we live in. And is there a version where maybe that's not the case? Possibly, but we don't live in that universe. We live in the universe where we see real life millionaires and billionaires and have to hear about their stories of coming up from rats. Like, there's none of that. And then in this movie, there's none of that either. But the sad thing is, like, so much of this movie is so good outside of that. Like you mentioned, the on-screen choreography is amazing. Like, the staging of the musical numbers is amazing. They themselves may not be super memorable, but like the butchers dancing around is so, like, everything is so well done. It's just kind of a shame that it just, none of it stands out.
Yeah, I take your point, and certainly was not destined to become kind of the cultural mainstay that other big musicals like The Sound of Music, for example.
Right.
Although I personally like Oliver better than The Sound of Music.
I've never seen The Sound of Music.
Oh, yeah? Oh, man. Talk about problematic. Most of the time they're singing about being in love with this Nazi.
I said the Nazi thing, and I was told it's not problematic with Nazis, but I know that there's a song about singing how much they're in love with a Nazi officer, right? Like, that is a thing.
Yeah, well, that was a tragedy that happened. No, I always call Sound of Music the first nunsploitation movie. Since it's all about Julie Andrews leaving the order and falling in love and and all of that. But anyway, that's another episode. There is much conventional about it. I do think if you watch it and you really focus yourself on Sykes and Dodger, and it'll take you in some really interesting directions as a viewer. Not to mention, we talked about how cool this would be if this had been a Bill Sykes movie. I mean, this is Oliver Reed at his most magnetic. He was sexy in this movie. Like,
oh yeah,
you just can't take your eyes off him. Which makes the tragedy of Nancy a little, like, almost relatable, because you can it's like you can almost understand like he's got a spell on her, just she can't break free. So there is so much tragedy in the movie that I really enjoyed revisiting and thinking about on deeper levels. The good songs are good. None of them are iconic.
Which is weird to me that this is so like well regarded and won an Oscar and all that stuff. And like, there's not even like, for me, there wasn't like one song that I was like, I'm gonna sing this like when I'm not like it'll be something I'll hum or want to listen to outside of this. And I'm not saying that every musical has to have a thing that's so good I want to listen to it outside of the musical, but it helps. I mean, the closest is probably I'll Do Anything, because it's kind of upbeat. It's a cheery song. I mean, even though the kind of the messaging of it is a little odd and codependent, I think it's a fun, upbeat number. And to your point about, Oliver Reed, I mean, he doesn't show up until 55 minutes into the movie.
Yeah.
And he doesn't say anything in the first scene that he's in. And that's, I mean, you get a sense with Fagin immediately, like, yes, Fagin is in charge, but really, Bill Sikes is in charge. Like, there's no amount of like getting around it, just looking at the way they interact in that scene where Bill Sikes says literally nothing and just holds his hand out. Like,
yeah. Fagin's dealing with a dog that has gone rogue on him,
Yeah.
Trying to manage him. Yeah. Well, that's the other thing about the movie that surprised me. Because when I see a running time of 2 hours and 45 minutes, I feel despair. Right? Like, whenever I see a movie that long, I'm like, oh my God. But I watched it straight through, and I didn't get fidgety. I was engaged, transfixed throughout, and so that says something about the movie to me, because I consider myself a fairly resistant viewer.
Right.
You got to really catch me if I'm gonna sit through that kind of runtime. And so I was impressed with that. The pacing of the movie, the way it kept things unfolding, moving characters around briskly, songs that were catchy enough, didn't go on too long, and the set design deserves all the accolades. I mean, this movie would really benefit from a restoration, because I bet it looks even better. I could see, the original theatrical look of it.
Right. Well, and I mean, it won Best Art Direction for a reason. Yeah. Like it. I mean, again, like that's the thing about this movie that you mentioned. Like you can't really overstate how good this movie looks, how the quality of the set design. It's an interesting movie to look at. I mean, again, is it really doing anything new or interesting that you haven't seen? No, not really. I mean, it's taking, Dickens and Dickensian ideas of this world, and I think implementing it in an interesting way. I mean, the bar where Nancy works is interesting. Fagin's hideout is an interesting setting. And then, the world outside of it in the streets, it has some life to it in a way that, it feels real. It feels lived in, like you mentioned with Monty Python and the Meaning of Life. Like it could have been filmed on that same set, frankly. Like it's such a lived in real world that, again, like even when you look at everything else in the musical, like it can get by on art direction alone. That is how well made the movie is, and how well directed it is, and how well put together it is. And all the, like you mentioned, all the musical numbers are well choreographed, and they are good adaptations of the stage musicals. But again, when you look at it, again, like that's the thing, like it's hard for me always to say, well, this is something worth checking out in the 21st century, because there are things just like this now, like a Les Mis, these big, important musicals that, again, like have kind of fallen, not out of importance, but there are new, more important musicals that have come out in the last like 10 to 15 years. And that's the thing with something like musicals, like every decade, there are those musicals that everybody who is at least halfway knowledgeable about musicals have heard of. In the last 10 years, I think it's been more or less dominated by Book of Mormon and Hamilton, and who knows what the next decade will bring. And before that, it was something like an Avenue Q or a Rent or a Wicked. And, there was a time and a place where this was a big deal when it came out, especially the original musical. So it's being adapted because the original musical is a thing that was immensely popular and successful. And they said, all right, let's turn it into a movie. And allowing them to create this world is something that, again, like, it should be commended, because the world is fully realized in a way I was not expecting, but is appreciated because, yeah, like you mentioned, it's a long movie. And in it being a long movie, it gives you enough to see and to appreciate in just what it's showing you. It doesn't necessarily have to be constantly entertaining you with the music.
Yeah. And it really has an interesting geography to it. You know, the sets are huge, but the way it kind of takes you around the town, you know, at times it feels very cramped. Another time, I mean, it's a hyper reality. Like, it's not really a realistic setting, but it is, yeah, as you say, it takes you into the world, and you really are sucked into the slums and the back streets and the ghettos, and then into the mercantile areas. And man, to me, the key sequence is the who will buy this? What is it? Wonderful Morning, Beautiful Morning.
Yeah. The song right after the intermission.
Well, right. So you've got all the servant classes coming in early in the morning with their stuff to sell, and they're setting up outside of these rich people's homes to try to sell them fish and flowers and you know, silks or whatever. I don't know. The carpenters are getting together. The maid staff are coming out to beat rugs and things like that. And so you're seeing the strata of the class-based strata interacting at different levels, right? Oliver is looking out the window on the third floor of this beautiful villa as all of these, you know, working class merchants are setting up. Down below, you've got the workmen and the maids coming out of the you know, lower parts of the house. So it's a really nice visual deployment of the class themes in the movie, I think.
And I really love the stark white of those buildings. Like, it makes everything in that scene just, I mean, like, I think for me, that might be the best musical number. I think I agree with you 100%. I think it's the most interesting musical number because there's so much going on at once. Like, I can only imagine getting to see the stage version, and I watched some of the versions on YouTube, the versions of this number, and like this, I mean, this kind of puts them all to shame, obviously, because like this has that setting clearly real, and like those buildings with the white and then the green, and each of these groups is costumed identically as well. So like you mentioned, you really get to see this idea of like, there are people within this world who have committed themselves to helping others exist, and they are doing it seemingly at their own, like, I guess they're losing their ability to be themselves by having to be this working class. But what's weird is you contrast that with the pickpockets and thieves and where they live. And again, like you mentioned, like if this were a little bit more subversive, it would feel like a comment on all of these people being the same and the creative types being off doing their own thing. But again, that would be us injecting the movie with that. But like, again, like if it's there, it's slyly done by having it be set in this stark white, all the same setting with all these people being dressed similarly, kind of losing their individuality again to this idea of like, what strata are you in? Are you banging the drums in the soldier uniform, or are you standing on the street with your oranges selling them?
Yeah, exactly.
And Oliver just staring at all of it with the wonderment of a child, singing his happy little voice out, you know?
And I gotta say, man, they cast that role perfect. That kid, the Mark Lester as a child, just has that, you know, innocent, like kitten alone in the cold, you know, look, and the big eyes that are just kind of always asking the question, you know, like, will you take care of me? Just amazing that they found that child at that time fit perfectly.
And he's really good. Like he's fantastic. I mean, he's not given much to do. I mean, like we've kind of alluded to, but he's well cast. I mean, he really is like, if he were any less precocious of a child, I don't think it would work. And that's the thing, like a precocious child in movies just doesn't, it's not something I'm particularly interested in. So like it's kind of at a disadvantage already, but again, like he's precocious enough without being like one of those kids where he's,
If he had like a Macaulay Culkin thing, because when Macaulay Culkin was a child actor, he always had that kind of like mischievousness about him.
Right.
This kid didn't have that at all.
No, he's just pathetic and sad the whole time.
Right. Like I say, he's perfectly cast, but on the other side of that token, the criticisms you make of the movie can also be attributed to the way Oliver is kind of positioned in the story as well, and those are all valid. So yeah, I was really grateful for the opportunity to see this movie again and think about it again and kind of revisit its place in my childhood, because I remember my mother like singing the Who Will Buy This Wonderful Morning song, to kind of wake me up as a
Sure.
kid. And Oliver, she would sing, and so I really associated this movie with that particularly innocent part of my childhood where I was still I was old enough to be running around and playing, but I was still kind of attached to my mother's hip and associated these songs and the feelings of the movie with her. And then I remembered the scary parts, right? Nancy's murder and Sykes threatening Oliver and ultimately being shot. But seeing them again as an adult, they hit me harder. So that was really cool. And if someone were to, even we mentioned earlier, right? This is a movie that for me was a big part of my childhood, and yet I didn't like bring it out later.
Right.
In my 20s. Certainly didn't say like, hey, young lady, want to come back to my place and watch Oliver? I never.
I guess, but like, why?
Oliver and Chill, I don't know, but I would recommend the movie to anybody who hadn't seen it. I would say, go into it with an eye of to kind of break down some of the stuff that's happening visually, because I think it's really interesting. I looked at the 1968 Academy Awards, and I think a lot of the wins that Oliver got were kind of because there were no real clear front runner.
Right.
Like The Lion in Winter was nominated for Best Picture. Funny Girl, right, with the Barbara Streisand musical that William Wyler directed. Rachel, Paul Newman had directed, but it got mixed reviews. Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet had, none of these were like blockbuster Oscar bait movies. I looked down at we still had the musical categories, and Oliver was up against Finian's Rainbow. That's probably Francis Ford Coppola's least remembered movie. Funny Girl Star with Julie Andrews. And none of those have really endured as classics. So I think Oliver kind of benefited from being a really big movie in a field where, obviously the best movie, I think most people would agree, is 2001, but nobody was really ready for it yet. Right.
Right. Yeah.
And I guess, Ruth Gordon won for Rosemary's Baby, but that was a horror movie, so that's not going to do much.
No, genre films, fuck that. How dare you? How dare you try to nominate something that's not, and that's the thing, like, looking at the way it was received, looking at what would happen afterwards. One of the movies we were going to cover this month, and we decided to cover Repo the Genetic Opera instead, was the movie that would win the Oscar for Best Picture as the first musical to win since Oliver, which was Chicago, which won in 2002.
Yeah.
And so many things were nominated in between then and Chicago, like Hello Dolly, Fiddler, Cabaret, all that jazz. Like, all those things were nominated as well. And in a lot of ways, it feels like those things didn't win because Oliver did. And to your point, this kind of becomes the thing that ends a certain time and a place of these kinds of things being a thing that Hollywood is interested in getting involved in terms of a award. Like, it seems like they were burned out from these kinds of movies, at least in the critical Academy Award sense. And again, like I'm not saying that this movie wouldn't still be worth talking about in 2024, if not for the fact that it won Best Picture and Best Director, but that definitely helps with its relevancy in terms of when award season comes around. I'm going to watch all the Academy Award movies. Oliver is one of those movies. So it stopped. I mean, in a lot of ways, like it stops kind of being a musical in this day and age. And it's just an Oscar-winning movie, which can mean, especially from this time, so many things, including a big production. Like in a lot of ways, it's funny that Chicago is the thing that won the Oscar after this, because Chicago in a lot of ways has the similar issues that this movie does, which is it's just a big version of the stage play, like, which is fine. And that's technically impressive, but like there are more interesting and important movies coming out at the time that aren't just a big celebration of the ability to make movies, which there's nothing wrong with that, but that doesn't always need to be the thing that wins. And in a lot of the times with the Academy, that is the thing that wins, which is the big thing that is an impressive thing that someone made, not necessarily the most interesting, important, or impactful movie of the year. And Oliver, in a lot of ways, checks those boxes, but that's not a bad thing. Sometimes, like you said, sometimes things like this do win because nothing else really that year is as big of a deal or makes as big of a splash or impact with the people that are watching it. This movie made a lot of money. It was immensely successful, and it was successful on its own, and the stage play was also successful. So there's a reason it was made, there was a reason it was nominated, and there was a reason it won, because it was a legacy thing that was important on its own, and then the film was important as well. So,
yeah, I think that's true. For me now, it's probably most interesting as a Carol Reed movie, right? Like I want to put it into the career of Carol Reed, because that's now, right, studying film history is kind of my deal. Prior to that, when I'm just watching it as a kid, I just remember the fuzzy moments from some of the songs and the fun moments with Dodger and pickpocketing. But in the larger context of musicals and Oscar winners, it does seem to be kind of an anomaly put at the end of the big musicals era. And as you say, as you were talking about Chicago and how it kind of won, despite the fact that there were more interesting and, in retrospect, more important movies that year, 2002, right? I think.
Yep.
Of course, what flashed in my head was La La Land, right? Almost winning.
Oh.
What was that, 2018?
2018 or 2017, I believe, yeah.
Right. So we think the big musical about Hollywood dreams is about to win again, and then no, it's actually Moonlight, which was kind of a moment of karmic justice in a way.
in a lot of ways, 100%. I mean, and then 2 years later, Green Book wins. So, well, you balance the good with the bad. I mean, again, we're recording this right after the Oscar nominations came out. So it's kind of like, it's impossible not to mention it. But I mean, again, I have no love for the Academy because my favorite movie of all time lost to Dances with Motherfucking Wolves, and ain't nobody give a shit about that movie anymore. I'm sorry, like Goodfellas is still one of the greatest films of all times, and not Gone with the Wind. Dances with Wolves is a movie that has Kevin Costner in it that I guess some people probably enjoy, which is fine. But some people enjoy Monster-in-Law too, which doesn't mean a whole lot to me either.
It was the inspiration for Avatar.
Yeah, well, so was Fern Gully, to be fair.
Fern Gully, that's right. I didn't know that Green Book won the Oscar. That's amazing. And I have to admit, I don't know who's been nominated this year.
Well, I mean, again, it's one of those things where I stopped caring once I realized that they're never going to change the way that they do things, even if they claim they do. And that's the thing. I mean, like so many of these other things, you can expand how many people you nominate. You can expand how many movies you nominate. It doesn't change the way decisions are made. And Oliver, in a lot of ways, again, like it won because it was a big musical, which the Academy loves those kinds of things. Like you said with La La Land, like I think everybody expected La La Land to win. I don't think anybody was surprised when it accidentally didn't win, when it won, but actually didn't win. Like nobody was surprised. Even me was like, oh yeah, okay. Like they're going to give it to, like, that makes sense. And then it wasn't that, which is fine. Like you said, that ends up being a moment in and of itself. But I mean, again, that comes from this, like that expectation comes from something like this winning.
Now I'm kind of wishing Oppenheimer had been a music.
A movie with its own very skewed, weird moral compass that tends to not talk about the real problems with the narrative. But hey, that is another episode. So Professor Dodson, I'll give you the an opportunity to have a final word on 1968's Oliver.
Well, when you're coming up in this world, sometimes you got to pick a pocket or two.
So I appreciate that. You know what? I appreciate that, frankly.
That is some Jay-Z shit right there. Don't hate the player.
Hate the game, baby. Don't hate Oliver. Hate the fact that Oliver has a very rich uncle. It's not his fault he's living in the lap of luxury. Blame the uncle who had all the money and just gave it to him with no strings attached. I mean, for me, I think this is a movie that, I enjoyed watching it. I enjoyed our conversation immensely, and getting to podcast with you for the first time has been a lot of fun. But I mean, I can guarantee that, because you and I have several other podcasts we're doing together this year, that there will be more fun and interesting conversations about movies that are more interesting and fun on their own. Not to say that this isn't a fun and interesting movie, but the things that are really great about it, there aren't enough of. And Oliver Reed and, and Jack Wilde and Ron Moody, of the three of those, Ron Moody gets the most, which is great, but it really would have been nice if Oliver Reed had been given a lot more, because again, I'm someone who's a fan of Oliver Reed. I would even go as far as to say his biography is worth checking out, even if it's a little long-winded. I think the audiobook is 18 hours, which is a lot for someone like an actor. But I mean, that's the thing. Like, I love Oliver Reed, so I'm willing to watch something that has Oliver Reed in it, even if I know it might not be something that for me, I would necessarily gravitate towards otherwise. So, on that note, we'll take a break and we'll play some ads, and then we'll play a preview for the final Culture Cast of January.
Hi, I'm Susan.
And I'm Sharon. And we're the hosts of 80s TV Ladies.
Check us out wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
And please like and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at 80s TV Ladies.
You can find interviews and exclusive behind-the-scenes content on all of your favorite 80s TV ladies.
80s TV Ladies is the place to go. Please join us.
80s TV Ladies.
Hi, this is HP from Noise Junkies.
And this is Father Malone from Dark Destinations.
Please join us as we examine one of the greatest sitcoms in television history, Taxi, on Night Mr. Walters, a Taxi podcast.
Good night, Mr. Walters.
Good evening, and welcome to Night Gallery.
Thank you, Rod. And I want to welcome everyone to Midnight Viewing, where once a month we talk all about your follow-up to The Twilight Zone, Rod Serling's Night Gallery.
They say it's Rod Serling's Night Gallery, and it isn't really Rod Serling's Night Gallery, it's somebody else's.
Oh, we know. We talk about it a lot. Your curators at Midnight Viewing are the Projection Booth's Mike White.
What can happen to human beings when trust is wiped out by suspicion?
And CultureCast's Chris Stashew.
Small boy encased in a crystal ball.
And I'm Father Malone.
The kind of thing that usually infests nightmares.
Join us monthly at Midnight Viewing, the Night Gallery podcast at weirdingwaymedia.com.
Doesn't remotely belong to me. I have no proprietary interest in that at all.
Remember when a movie could make you dream, could make you dance, could make you feel on top of the world?
I once had a dream that I owned a coin-operated laundromat, and I came down from that cloud real quickly.
On July 20th.
This is America. Go for it.
Get out there and show them.
You can't stop the beat. Hairspray, rated PG, starts July 20th.
That's right. On the final Culture Cast of January, we're going to be talking about another musical I've never seen, and it's based off of a John Waters musical, so that's good. It's Hairspray, everybody, and I've never seen it, and I'm excited to watch it because I've seen very little John Waters anything, which is a big failing on my part for a number of reasons. Hairspray, something worth checking out, Professor Dodson?
Oh, I thought it was supposed to be quiet.
No, I know. You're Jesus. Shut your mouth. No, yeah.
So this is the original, the 80.
No, the John Travolta one.
Okay, I was about to say, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you were really excited that I might be covering the original one, huh? I'm sorry.
Oh, you're watching the John Travolta one? Okay. Well, enjoy.
Have fun with that.
I am really glad that John Waters made a shit ton of money. I like that. That's one man I will not begrudge his money.
and you know what, like that for me, like I'm with you, like someone like that making a movie and then having it readapted and someone making a lot of money, that person being John Waters, like awesome. I'm with you. So you know what, and if it allows John Travolta to embrace the person that I think we all know he is, even more exciting. So hey man, all those rumors can't not be true. Like at some point we just have to go, John, we get it. You're a nice guy, but the Church of Scientology is hanging something over your head pretty hard, apparently. So
man's been through a lot.
He sure has. It's unfortunate because he seems like a real nice guy who can laugh at himself and play Santa Claus. So
yeah, I'll have to check it out sometime. I am a big fan of Waters and the original version, and I was always curious about like what a Hollywood version of a John Waters movie would look like. So I'm actually curious. I'll check out the episode and then I'll give it a watch.
I've heard it's good. I've heard it's really good. So I'm excited to watch it. I'm going to be joined by another first-time guest, a fellow Indian cinema fan, Josh Hurtado, will be joining me then. So until then, until that episode, Professor Dodson, where could people find you kicking around on the internet if they wanted to find you and the things you work on?
Well, I occasionally post on Instagram at WDodson52 and on Twitter or X at the same WDodson52. Usually I make posts about Jim Wynorski movies or projects that I have coming up, one or the other. Hopefully one day they'll intersect. And I'll quickly say that I'm really proud of this. My partner Ryan and I from Someone's Favorite Productions contributed a video essay and a commentary to Severin's recent release of the great Italian horror film, The Spider Labyrinth. So check that out if you're inclined. And I'm going to be in a couple books coming out later this year, but I don't know what they're called and when they're coming out yet. So maybe next time I'll talk about those.
Well, as you mentioned, with working with our friend, mutual friend Ryan Verrill, you guys are doing good work over there, and I know y'all are busy all the time, which is not a bad thing, or maybe it is. I don't know. I've
wanted to quit so many times. I want to quit today.
Right now, even I'm quitting on this episode. I get it. I totally get it. As for me, you can find me on the internet at Weirding Way Media and on Patreon, where if you donate at the $10 level, you get access to Rankin' on Bond, which is a podcast where Richard Haddam and Mike White and I talk all about James Bond movies once a month. And right now, we're still just at the beginning. We've only talked about our feelings on James Bond. So if you want to get in, $10 is all it takes over at patreon.com/culturecast. Yeah, Dr. Dodson, I guess you are, Professor Dodson. Professor Dodson, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a lot of fun. And I'm glad the conversation was more interesting in some ways than the movie.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. So thanks for having me. I think we're going to talk about some Powell and Pressburger next time, right?
I believe so. Yeah. So yeah. Until then, we'll catch you on the next episode.